Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into one of the most shocking developments in Eastern Europe, the growing chaos in Belarus. Reports are emerging that military bases have been seized, tensions are spiraling, and President Alexander Lukashenko's grip on power looks weaker than ever. This could be the most serious challenge to his rule since the 2020 protests. But what exactly is happening in Belarus right now? Who is behind the turmoil? And most importantly, is this the end for Lukashenko? Let's break it all down. Belarus has long been described as Europe's last dictatorship, tightly controlled by Alexander Lukashenko for nearly 3 decades. His alliance with Russia has been crucial to his survival, especially after massive protests erupted in 2020 following disputed elections. Since then, Lukashenko has relied heavily on Moscow's political, military, and economic support. But recent events suggest that this dependency might now be turning into a dangerous trap. Reports from inside Belarus indicate that several military installations, particularly those near the Ukrainian and Polish borders, have been taken over by forces whose loyalty is unclear. Some claim they're rogue Belarusian units demanding Lukashenko's resignation. Others suggest that Russian troops have quietly assumed control of key bases under the pretext of joint defense operations. Either way, Lukashenko's authority over his own military seems to be slipping away. Tensions between Belarus and its neighbors have been escalating for months. Since Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Belarus has served as a strategic staging ground for Russian forces. Lukashenko allowed Moscow to use Belarusian territory for troop deployments, missile launches, and logistics operations, a move that deeply angered both Ukraine and NATO. But as the war dragged on, the Belarusian people grew increasingly uneasy. Many ordinary Belarusians do not support being dragged into a war they never chose. Now, the situation appears to be spinning out of control. Intelligence reports suggest that Russian military advisors stationed in Belarus have effectively taken over command structures in several bases. Belarusian officers who resisted were reportedly removed or detained. This could indicate that Moscow no longer fully trusts Lukashenko to maintain order or to guarantee loyalty in the event of a wider regional conflict. If true, this would be a humiliating loss of sovereignty for Belarus and a personal disaster for Lukashenko. For years, Lukashenko has played a dangerous balancing act trying to appear loyal to Putin while occasionally signaling independence to the West. He has refused to send his troops directly into Ukraine despite repeated pressure from Moscow. This reluctance angered the Kremlin, which expected full Belarusian participation in the war. In recent weeks, there have been unconfirmed reports that Putin's patience with Lukashenko has finally run out. Russia, some analysts say, may now be preparing to sideline him altogether. Inside Belarus, opposition movements that were brutally crushed in 2020 are starting to show signs of revival. Underground networks and exiled leaders have been calling on the Belarusian military to resist Russian control and to stand with the people. The sudden seizure of military bases could be a sign that parts of the army are indeed turning against Lukashenko, or at least no longer following his orders. The exact motives remain murky, but what's clear is that the political and military structures holding Belarus together are fracturing fast. Meanwhile, in Minsk, Lukashenko is reportedly scrambling to assert control. State media has gone into overdrive, blaming foreign saboteurs and Ukrainian agents for the unrest. Security forces have been deployed across major cities, and curfews have been rumored in several regions. However, the government's denials are doing little to calm the situation. Even loyal insiders are said to be questioning how long Lukashenko can maintain his rule if the military is slipping from his hands. Internationally, reactions have been cautious but concerned. NATO has increased surveillance along the Polish and Lithuanian borders, fearing that instability in Belarus could spill over. Ukraine, already battling Russian forces on multiple fronts, is watching the northern border closely for any signs of renewed threats. For Kiev, a weakened Lukashenko could be both an opportunity and a risk. It could limit Russian operations from Belarusian territory, but also open the door to unpredictable chaos next door. Moscow, for its part, has remained largely silent. The Kremlin has officially denied any involvement in the reported base seizures, insisting that all joint operations with Belarus are proceeding normally. Yet many analysts find this statement suspiciously vague. Historically, Russia has used moments of instability in neighboring states to tighten its control, just as it did in Crimea, the Donbas, and more recently in occupied Ukrainian regions. It wouldn't be surprising if Russia is quietly orchestrating events to ensure Belarus becomes a de facto extension of its military command. If Lukashenko is indeed losing control, what comes next for Belarus? There are a few possible scenarios. The first is that Lukashenko manages to cling to power by cracking down hard on dissent and purging disloyal officers. He has survived crises before using fear, propaganda, and brute force. But this time, the challenge may be too deep, especially if parts of the army and security forces no longer obey him. The second scenario is a Kremlin-backed power transition. Moscow could replace Lukashenko with a more compliant figure, someone willing to formally integrate Belarus into Russia's political or military structures. There have been rumors of talks among Russian strategists about a Union state acceleration, which would effectively erase Belarusian independence under the guise of unity. If this plan is real, the current unrest could be the perfect excuse to implement it. The third scenario, and perhaps the most unpredictable, is that Belarus descends into open conflict. If competing factions within the military or government start fighting for control, the country could face a civil war scenario. That would send shockwaves across Europe, drawing in Russia, Ukraine, and possibly even NATO indirectly. Belarus has never experienced full-scale internal conflict before, but the combination of foreign troops, internal discontent, and an unpopular leader creates a volatile mix. The Belarusian people, meanwhile, find themselves caught in the middle. After years of repression, fear, and economic hardship, many are simply exhausted. The younger generation, especially those who fled after 2020, are watching anxiously from exile. They dream of a free Belarus, but they also fear that the collapse of Lukashenko could simply lead to deeper Russian domination rather than true independence. Economically, Belarus is already on the brink. Sanctions, trade restrictions, and a collapsing ruble have devastated industries. The loss of foreign investment and the near-total isolation from Western markets have made the country heavily dependent on Moscow for survival. If the current instability continues, Belarus could face economic meltdown, triggering a humanitarian crisis that would affect millions. Lukashenko's recent speeches reveal a man under immense pressure. His tone has grown more paranoid, filled with accusations against traitors, Western agents, and even cowardly generals. Such rhetoric often signals the beginning of a leader's downfall. The more he tries to project strength, the clearer it becomes that his regime is weakening from within. In the broader geopolitical picture, the fate of Belarus could have huge implications. For Russia, losing control of Belarus would be a strategic disaster, cutting off one of its key Western buffers. For NATO, instability in Belarus raises the risk of accidental escalation along the alliance's eastern flank. And for Ukraine, any shift in Belarus's alignment could reshape the northern front of the war. As the days go by, one question dominates every discussion: is Lukashenko finished? Many analysts believe that even if he manages to survive this immediate crisis, his long-term position is unsustainable. His dependence on Russia has stripped Belarus of its independence, while his brutality has alienated his own people. The regime stands not on loyalty, but on fear, and fear eventually fades. If Belarus truly stands on the edge, what comes next might not just change Minsk's future, but the balance of power across Eastern Europe. The fall of Lukashenko, whether through a coup, foreign manipulation, or internal collapse, would mark the end of an era. It could open the door to either liberation or deeper subjugation under Moscow's shadow. For now, all eyes are on Belarus. Each day brings new rumors, new denials, and new warnings, but one thing is certain: the country is no longer stable. The illusion of control that Lukashenko maintained for decades is cracking fast. Whether the final blow comes from inside his army, from Moscow, or from the streets, his reign is entering its most dangerous phase. Belarus has always stood at the crossroads between East and West, freedom and control, hope and fear. Today, that crossroads has become a battlefield not just for territory, but for the nation's soul. The next few weeks could determine whether Belarus remains a puppet state under Moscow's thumb or finally begins the painful path toward independence and democracy. Whatever happens next, one thing is clear: the world can no longer ignore Belarus. The events unfolding there may look like a domestic crisis, but their consequences could ripple far beyond its borders. The collapse of Lukashenko's rule, if it comes, would reshape not just Belarus, but the entire geopolitical landscape of Eastern Europe. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned, because the situation in Belarus is developing faster than anyone expected. Don't forget to subscribe for more deep analysis of global events, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Is Lukashenko's rule finally coming to an end, or will he find a way to survive yet again? Whatever happens, history is being written right now on the streets and bases of Belarus.